Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan has blamed the US envoy to be in cahoots with the domestic opposition in conspiracy, according to him, to destabilize his country. It is China that is the actual villain, which has systematically squeezed Pakistan dry by way of extending unrepayable loans after loans to the Pakistani army and then usurping territory after territory, thereby running the terror factory out of the failed state with an eye on India and Afghanistan. In the next half hour or so, we will discuss why China has been funding Pakistan and if Pakistan has turned into literally a territory of China. What does this mean for India? And why is Imran Khan trying to pin the blame on the Western world? Who is Pakistan's enemy number one? Is it China or is it the US? That really is the big focus point. To discuss this in greater details, I'd like to welcome a panel of experts, starting with Dr. Srikanth Kontapalli. He's a China and foreign policy expert. Also joining us is Lieutenant General retired Rajendra Singh, defense expert. Also with us is Pathikrit Pain, strategic and international affairs expert. Professor Yamini Agarwal, director of the Bharatiya Vidyapeeth Institute of Management and Research, is also live with us on the broadcast. I thank you all, and starting the debate, first of all, with Dr. Srikanth Kontapalli. Sir, when we speak of the latest developments from Pakistan, Imran Khan very obviously trying to play the victim card, trying to pin the blame for his downfall, his demise on the West, trying to prove to his countrymen, playing domestic politics by showing that the foreign forces, as he claims, are very directly, indirectly pointing fingers at US, are interfering in Pakistan. End of the day, the real enemy is China. Imran Khan, in his tenure, of course, he took a page from his predecessors, but he went a step forward. He has left no stone unturned, literally to ensure that Pakistan turns into China's colony. Do you think that the people of Pakistan are also aware of this truth, and end of the day, there are no buyers for his propaganda? Dr. Kontapalli, can you unmute yourself, please?
Yes. Sanaullah Baloch once said that Pakistan is a colony of China. A Baloch leader, he mentioned some years ago about the kind of copper mining and Gwadar port and other activities that China is undertaking in Pakistan. That apart, I think Pakistan is under heavy pressure from all the actors, United States, Russia, China, and others. They are, of course, facing, as you mentioned, the debt-related problem. Only recently, about 10 days ago, Wang Yi, the foreign minister, visited Pakistan as part of the OIC meeting, and he waived off $4.2 billion of debt, rolled over, not waived off. So that indicates that there is a, as you mentioned, the debt-related problem in Pakistan. With the CPEC projects, there is a lot of aid that has flown in, number one. The former Prime Minister Imran Khan's observation on Ambassador Lu, that United States is interfering in the internal affairs. I think this is also in the background of his visit to Moscow and the fissures within the Pakistani establishment, because General Bajwa recently said in a security conference that Russian invasion of Ukraine is not acceptable. It had destroyed Ukraine and created a lot of havoc in Ukraine, while Imran Khan was supporting China, which did not condemn Russia, which did not have, use those words as General Bajwa did. So there is a huge differentiation within the Pakistani constituents, a pro-Russia, a pro-US position, and a pro-China position.
But is there a discrepancy, sir? And I'm sorry I'm interrupting you, but if you look at the previous dispensations in Pakistan as well, even the options, for Imran Khan, it's not like that they are very averse to aligning with China. It looks like that the politicians in China are deliberately choosing not to see the debt trap they will be falling in if they embrace China too closely. Of course, they're blinded by a jealousy towards India, and that's one of the reasons why the two countries have come together. But Lieutenant General Rajendra Singh, just as we were discussing the words of the Army Chief of Pakistan, Mr. Bajwa, do you think that his words can be taken seriously at all? When he speaks of a possible dialogue with India, do you think, if at all, the dispensation, which obviously it is going to change, and Imran Khan is not going to be the Prime Minister of the country, but even if someone else becomes the Prime Minister of the country, do you think that Pakistan's policy vis-a-vis China is going to see any change at all?
No, you're right. As far as Pakistan's policy towards China is concerned, it is going to remain unchanged. And their army chief has also said that Pakistan's best friend is China. What the army chief is talking about is softening of the stance as regards relationship with India is concerned. Well, that could be one of their maneuver, but it can at best be called a tactical maneuver. Their overall philosophy remains the same. That is, they want to fund terrorism, they want to promote it, and they want to export it to India.
Yeah.
And this is not going to change. But the worst is that of late, Pakistan government was under a lot of fire from their own people for 4 or 5 things. The major ones being their economy. Their economy was in shambles.
Yes.
They had the kind of loans which were just impossible to be repaid. And the major beneficiary or the major cause of all this was China. And despite this, they had no other option but to go in for IMF loans and ask for other things. The second thing was that their inflation was going up very high. The cost of items were, daily use items were going up. There was a general disgruntlement in the people. But in last about 10-15 days, Imran Khan actually played his trump card. And that trump card was that he diverted attention of his people
from China to US. Point taken. From China to US, but is that strategy working? Pathikrit Main, end of the day, we have to agree with all the panelists. Imran Khan's undoing is on his own. The fact that he embraced China so closely, that the fact that, under the Imran Khan dispensation, Pakistan increased the loans it was taking from China over and above, of course, the IMF loans which were pending. That really is one of the reasons which led to Pakistan's undoing, and that's one of the reasons why Pakistan is in such a dire economic state. Just look at Sri Lanka. Very, very similar example played out in Sri Lanka. Loan after loan, 2010 onwards, we'd seen Sri Lanka government dealing very, very closely with China, and look at where the country is, the condition the country is in today, and looks like Pakistan unfortunately is going down the same path.
Meenakshi, Pakistan's biggest enemy is Pakistan itself. Chinese loan is definitely a major issue.
Yes.
They are definitely in a debt trap, no doubt about that. But let's also accept the fact that Chinese loan is a mere 20 to 25% of the total debt that Pakistan has today. Yeah. Their total debt, internal and external, is $290 billion, which is almost at par with their GDP. Their external debt is $90 billion, which is going to go up to $105 billion by end of next fiscal. The amount they owe to China is around $24 billion. The problem is somewhere else. Number one, what China does and how they have put it, the Pakistan is into a debt trap, is that Pakistan for a long period of time tried to play the role of hunting with the hound and running with the hare. Yes. While fighting so-called terrorism, in Afghanistan. And so the West actually got disgruntled with Pakistan. So when they got disgruntled with Pakistan, Pakistan thought that let's shift to the Chinese fold, because the Chinese were really willing to finance them or bankroll them. But the Chinese do not actually give any kind of free meal. What the Chinese have done, and why Pakistan is in a problem, is that the $53 billion of CPEC that is being being claimed as a game changer for Pakistan. Let's understand, this is not foreign direct investment from China. FDI is debt free.
Yeah.
What China does is not FDI. What China does is infrastructure financing, which means all this money that they give to Pakistan has to be paid back at a very high interest rate.
Yeah.
The interest rate is as high as 4.2%, whereas international loan from development agencies is merely at 1.1%. Now let's understand what the Chinese have done. Number one, when the Chinese come for any kind of project, all these projects that we talk about in Pakistan, there is no competitive bidding. All the turnkey projects go to Chinese companies, get reinsured by Chinese insurance companies, financed by Chinese banks. All skilled and semi-skilled employee people come from China, materials come from China. Pakistan does not get anything. Pakistan people don't get anything, but the liability of repaying the loan is with Pakistan. And surprisingly, Pakistan has accepted these conditions. Now, one more thing, what has happened, because they are in this debt trap, they are not in a position to pay back, because they have never done the structural reforms of economy, because there is no other investment coming in. Pakistan, for the sake of getting these loans rolled over or deferred payment, Pakistan, to keep China happy, also agreed for a free trade agreement under which more than 7,000 of Chinese goods enter Pakistan with zero import duty,
Yes,
which means
yes.
Pakistani companies cannot compete against Chinese companies in Pakistan market. So they are in a perpetual debt trap. One last point. What Imran Khan has done a mistake is that he has burnt his bridges with the West, which means the loan that they had supposed to get from World Bank and IMF for rolling over, because they are in a debt trap, no doubt, that loan will no more come easily.
And anyway, IMF loans come with a lot of riders.
Yes, now they will be more dependent on the Chinese, and China. Pakistan today is a vassal state of China, a vassal state. It's a front state of China, which is being used by China. There is nothing that the people of Pakistan get out of it. End game will be very dangerous.
Taken. Let me take your thought forward, Professor Agarwal. Would you say, or would you agree with Mr. Mukherjee that Patikrit Pain, that Pakistan is completely capitulated to China, that it's literally, as he says, a vassal state of China? There is no way out really of the debt trap, which consecutive governments, of course, Imran Khan was overzealous and he went overboard, and he has even destroyed Pakistan's relations with the West. But going forward, any way for Pakistan to sort of distinguish or move away from China, or is it just too late for that? And even a change of the dispensation, a change of the government cannot change that fact. The fact remains, end of the day, that Pakistan as of now is nothing but a vassal of China, that it's completely capitulated to the Chinese. Can you please unmute yourself? Okay, I think there is some audio trouble there, and I'll come back to you. Dr. Kondapalli, would you like to take this question? How do you view, the China-Pakistan relation, especially Pakistan's dependence on China? Would you agree that today Pakistan is completely capitulated to China? And do you see any change going forward, as and when, of course, Imran Khan is replaced, which only seems to be a matter of days?
Number one, the United States has withdrawn from Afghanistan. So they are no more dependent on Pakistan for the logistics from Bahrain to Afghanistan and to Central Asian theater. So because of the strengthening of the Indo-Pacific Quad and others, they have now no more value for Afghanistan. United States spent about $28 billion in Pakistan with the assumption that Pakistan will fight counterterrorism, but that has not really yielded results, as we saw the Abbottabad operation by the Navy SEALs had indicated. Number one. Number two, in terms of China, they had a patron-client relationship before.
Yes.
That has now become much more strengthened, with China observing a lot of conditionalities. So last year, when the Daso hydroelectricity project incident took place, when 11 Chinese were killed, the Global Times argued that they will launch missiles against the terrorists. Of course, that's a tall order because if missiles could kill the terrorists, then the whole of terrorism would have been wiped off.
Yeah.
But that indicates basically that China is going to follow the American pattern of using missiles to strike at these terrorists.
But why would Pakistan ever agree to that?
Because of the debt that they have accumulated from China, number one. And although Pakistan protested the drone attacks from the US on Afghanistan and Pakistan, they also now have no other go but to accept the Chinese conditions. So it is likely that the Chinese will use their own, because during the investigation, it is the Chinese scientists, technicians, etc., who went to do their own investigation about this hydroelectricity in KP. So in other words, the Chinese would act in the same way as the Americans acted. But Americans didn't have the control over the territory, and they had no foreign policy option of controlling territories in Pakistan. But the change that China would bring in is to gobble up Gwadar, to gobble up Saksham, Agil, Shimshal.
Yes.
That is what they're going to do with land occupation.
And that is a big concern to India, isn't it, Lieutenant General Rajendra Singh? When we look at China's pattern, China ensnares countries into debt trap, and of course the collateral is land, and of course it goes on to occupy geostrategic locations in countries which are borrowing from China. The fact that China and Pakistan are in such a close embrace, that China's hold over Pakistan is almost complete. The fact that the route really for this relation going forward also seems to be just like how China has behaved with other countries it has loaned to, certainly a huge security concern to India as well.
Yes, certainly. Actually, China's relationship with Pakistan is basically, it has only two objectives. One is that it wants to use Pakistan to get an access to the Arabian Sea. But more importantly, what it wants to use is, it wants to use Pakistan as a counter to India. And for Pakistan, besides getting loans from China, China has been supplying them a lot of goodies as far as the military hardware is concerned. A lot of their weapon systems, their aircrafts, their tanks, all these things are coming from China. Earlier, most of their equipment were West-based, and their old aircraft, Chinese aircrafts. But that is not the case now. So basically, the relationship between Pakistan and China is really focused towards or focused against India. And the second thing which China also wants to use Pakistan is, it wants to use Pakistan's influence in Afghanistan so as to ensure that its own Xinjiang province remains peaceful. And there are no terrorist activities which take place there. But the thing of greatest concern now is that both Pakistan as well as Sri Lanka are falling into debt traps.
Yes.
And it is not going to be too far that they would have no other option but to go in for radical measures. And the difference is, Pakistan is a nuclear state.
And also Pakistan is a state which does not want to introspect. Point taken, sir. But Professor Yamini Agarwal, I believe your audio issues have been sorted now. Since you've joined the debate a little later, we were just discussing really how Pakistan has completely capitulated to China and has become literally a colony of China. Given really the sort of political upheaval which is taking place in Pakistan, do you think that anything will change with the change of a government, let's say a Shahbaz comes to power, or even if a Bilawal comes to power, is there any way that they can distance themselves from China at all, considering the huge amount of debt which Pakistan any which way has already taken from China, and the economic shambles the country currently is in?
Well, I think when you talk about China and Pakistan relationship, they have been going on a stronger note, primarily because there has been something called a One Belt, One Initiative, which has been taken by China, whereby it is infusing a huge amount of investment through the infrastructure mode. This particular deal of actually giving money to Pakistan through the infrastructure mode has been one of the modes of China, not only to finance Pakistan, but also to finance Sri Lanka as well as many other countries, primarily to seek more expansion of its powers and have a greater influence in their overall political phase which they are actually undertaking. So when we talk about Imran Khan going out and somebody else coming in, I don't see much changing in terms of the influence of China, primarily because I do see China as a main player who has been financing their activities in the name of infrastructure. Another important thing that one needs to remember is that both these countries are encroaching upon the other countries' territories. Like Pakistan has encroached upon Kashmir.
Okay, there seems to be some network issue there, ma'am.
China is touching upon.
Sorry, there seems to be some network issue, but I guess the point you were trying to make towards the end was how China is encroaching upon Pakistan's land in the name of debt, and that really is China's tendency. So there's no doubt about that. But particular pain, since we are speaking of Pakistan-China relations, of course, in the broader context of the political tamasha, the political drama which is currently taking place in Pakistan, we can broad base it further and analyze Pakistan relations with West also, considering that Imran Khan has tried to portray America as Pakistan's enemy number one. It certainly is going to have a bearing on the next governments as well. It seems very clear, considering that Pakistan has very closely aligned itself with China, its relations with the West, especially with the US, which it was a close partner of in the past, have been altered forever, isn't it?
Well, frankly speaking, the West doesn't give two hoots about Pakistan or Imran Khan anymore.
Yeah.
As Professor Kontapalli also mentioned, that they don't have any interest in that region, any APAC region anymore. Secondly, if United States had to make any kind of regime change, they certainly will not write letters. So that's stupidity on the part of Imran Khan to create this conspiracy theory. What he has done for his own political self-interest is that he has completely destroyed Pakistan relation with the West, and now getting the loans will be very difficult. See, when you compare Sri Lanka and Pakistan, I think Sri Lanka is a little easier, economy to reform than Pakistan, because how do you get out of this debt trap? You have to increase your tax to GDP ratio. You have to increase your industrial proficiency. You have to expand your exports. You have to earn more foreign exchange reserve. You have to reduce your dependence on external, imports, and you have to increase more of your exports. That's how you do it. So that kind of structural reforms India also did in 1990. We did it judiciously, and we have come from the verge of bankruptcy to become a $3.2 trillion economy. I think India to a certain extent will handhold Sri Lanka to come out of it, possibly. But when it comes to Pakistan, it's very difficult to do it. No reform can be done there. Radical Islamist organizations have eaten up the country. The army will not reduce its own stranglehold. So economic reform is not going to happen. So they will completely remain in the stranglehold of China. But let's understand, if the Chinese had a game plan of usurping the land of Pakistan and completely taking over Pakistan, it's not going to be so easy. Unlike in case of Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, which they took over because of inability of Sri Lanka to pay the money. Sri Lanka or Uganda, whose airport the Chinese took over, they don't have insurgency. Pakistan has a massive insurgency problem. So it's not going to be easy for China to handle the problems in Gilgit-Baltistan or in the Balochistan province or in Karachi. It's going to be a nightmare, even if they want to do something.
Yes.
So what I foresee is that eventually Pakistan will implode from inside.
And that was the point which Dr. Kontapalli was also...
One thing, Meenakshi, just one sentence. That's why if you see, even though they have pledged around $55 to $60 billion for CPEC, they have merely released $27 billion. They are not willing to bankroll any more of the projects because they're very, very concerned, right?
And
What
most
is the
projects, you
outcome
rightly
of
said,
Pakistan?
most projects have reached a standstill also because of the problem of radical terrorism, which is of course continuing to be present in Pakistan. And I think that was a point which Dr. Kontapalli, you were making right at the onset of this discussion as well. End of the day, the cocktail of doom which we are seeing in Sri Lanka, it also, a large part of it had to do with the bombings, the Easter bombing which had taken place in Sri Lanka. I'm not trying to draw a parallel here, but certainly, terrorism, insurgency also have a huge impact on economy. And as far as the deep state of Pakistan is concerned, it's very clear. They have no intention on cracking down on terror, and that must be a huge concern to China as well.
Yes, on the, as General Rajendra Singh mentioned, there is...
Apologies, I think it was General Singh who was making that point, but go ahead, Dr. Kontapalli.
Yeah, he mentioned about Xinjiang factor as a crucial one. So the quid pro quo the Chinese have is, as long as the ISI is not running the tanzims for the Uyghurs, then they are willing to cooperate with Pakistan. So that's a bottom line that has been there since the Mujahideen has been raised in 79 to 89 period. So that's one crucial factor in China-Pakistan relations. But of course, even the ISI is not in control of many of these tanzims in the Fatah region, and also the recent Afghan-Taliban relations. So this is going to boomerang on the Chinese when we look at the Xinjiang-related matters. So while the crux of the China-Pakistan relations is on the terrorism-related aspects, the hydroelectricity dam incident indicates that the TPP and other Baluch Liberation Army or others could even target the Chinese, as they are doing right now. And this is pretty much beyond the Pakistan Army's control. The Chinese have supported not the democracy, not the judiciary, not the media in Pakistan, but the army. But since the army had taken a different position than the Chinese on Ukrainian situation, there are also fissures now that are emerging between the Chinese and the Pakistani army.
But I think at the end of the day, as we conclude, there is no doubt, sir, to say that in Pakistan, it is the army which calls the shot. And if you antagonize the army, there is no way for you to stay in power. And that's exactly what has happened to Imran Khan. And perhaps that's why he's trying to portray himself as a victim. He cannot openly point fingers at the army. So what does he do? He starts floating a conspiracy theory, claiming some foreign powers are trying to dislodge him. But it's very clear that it's China which is the real enemy of Pakistan. Why just Pakistan? Perhaps entire South Asia. They have been extending loan after loans to country. These loans are unrepayable, and then they later take over territory after territory. We've seen this being played out in Sri Lanka, same game being played out in Pakistan. But of course, the going is not going to be very easy for China in Pakistan, considering Pakistan, of course, is a hub of terror. What really this proximity of China and Pakistan, which literally flourished under Imran Khan regime, would turn into when there is a regime change, and what it means for India and the world, we'll have to wait and watch. As of now, I'd like to thank all the experts. We're completely running out of time.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.